Namaskar to all of you. Before beginning my talk, I would like to touch upon 2 points. First point is, since this seminar is has been sponsored by the UGC and is being conducted by an academic institution, the Sri Ramakrishna Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna will be taken in this discourse as a world teacher, as a teacher, not as the avatar. About the avatarhood of Sri Ramakrishna have written a good deal elsewhere. So here we'll think of Sri Ramakrishna as a world teacher. Secondly, this seminar is about Sri Ramakrishna's ideas in modern times. Since Sri Ramakrishna had only the rudiments of formal education, it is generally presumed that he gave only some ideas and teachings. But the truth is, he had developed a cogent system of philosophy unique of his own, based on his own experiences and also the knowledge he had gained from others. As when somebody once pointed out that he had not read many books in the Kathamrita, it comes immediately Sri Ramakrishna corrected him. How much have I heard? He educated himself at the greatest school, and that is life itself. Sri Ramakrishna identified life with the Divine Mother. So the Divine Mother was herself is the greatest teacher. Apart from that, Sri Ramakrishna learned much from his gurus. Bhairavi Brahmani, from her, she learned much about Vaishnava sadhana, tantric disciplines, and from Totapuri, he learned much about Advaita Vedanta, and many wandering monks and ascetics used to come to our Dakshineshwar, the guest house, they used to stay, and from them also, she used to listen to their talks. And whenever there were discourses on Bhagavat and all that in other places, you would go and attend them. So through all that, he acquired a lot of knowledge about Hindu scriptures and systems of philosophy. The one unique thing about Sri Ramakrishna's before that, one more point, and that is, through all that he developed a unique system of philosophy. Yesterday, our Professor Pradyut Kumar Mukhopadhyay said that Sri Ramakrishna, what Sri Ramakrishna taught, had been taught by hundreds of people for thousands of years in India. It is not much new. That is true. India, spirituality has been as luxuriant growth in this country, and the stream of there has been for more than 3,000 or 4,000 years. There has been flowing a stream of spirituality in India, not ordinary stream. It is a huge stream like an Amazon river. It contains all the ideas, no doubt. But there is one basic difference. Ordinary river, the waters of an ordinary flowing river don't have much power. The water can be used, an ordinary river can be used for irrigation. But the same water is directed through the giant turbines of a hydroelectric project, it acquires tremendous power. Thousands of megawatts of energy, electricity are produced and transmitted to different parts of the country. The same way, the Sri Ramakrishna was like a giant hydroelectric project, the giant turbines of the hydroelectric project. So the ideas, spiritual ideas were all there, but he gave power to them by applying them in his own life. Through his own sadhana, he energized those power. So that is the difference between a message and a philosophy. A philosophy and message, the difference is, message is charged with the power of the teacher, the person who he lives that and gives it back, charges with power and then gives it back to the society. These are not my words. Swami Vivekananda himself has said this. The unique thing about Sri Ramakrishna's message or philosophy is ordinary teachers generally teach one kind of philosophy or one type of message. Sri Ramakrishna followed different spiritual paths and varied experiences. Ashime Leela Pathe, as Rabindranath Bolchilen, the infinite experiences of the infinite are created a shrine of unity in your life. So that is, in Sri Ramakrishna had varied experiences of the ultimate reality. So his philosophy or message that he developed is a vast and synthetic, holistic approach. This has been what the philosophy of Sri Ramakrishna was. Some people, especially some of the Western scholars, regard it as belonging to the Shakta tradition. But if we study carefully, we can see that Sri Ramakrishna's teachings and philosophy belong to the Vedantic tradition. I don't have the time to show the difference between the Shakta tradition and the Vedantic tradition and how Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy conforms more to the Vedanta tradition. But Vedanta has different schools. Sri Ramakrishna did not stick to one particular school alone. He did not accept only one system to be true. Each Acharya followed or propounded only one particular viewpoint and one particular school. So Sri Ramakrishna accepted all the schools of Vedanta. So his Vedanta may be described as integral Vedanta. Apart from that, Sri Ramakrishna accepted the views of other religions also. So we may say that his philosophy may be described as universal Vedanta. So integral Vedanta or universal Vedanta would be a more appropriate term to describe Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy. So I would like to first of all mention or discuss the main tenets, the main concepts of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy or Sri Ramakrishna's message. If somebody asks, what was the message of Sri Ramakrishna? What are the main elements, main points in Sri Ramakrishna's message or philosophy? I found there we can identify nearly 8 or 9 main concepts or tenets in Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, such as transcendent experience as pramana, integral view of reality, integral experience known as vijnana, the transformation of the ego, philosophy of love and service, linking the human and the divine, philosophy of harmony, and stress on moral foundation foundation of religion and spirituality, a positive outlook on life, and lastly, a philosophy of spiritual fulfillment. So begin with the first principle, that is direct transcendent experience as pramana. All the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy accept 3 pramanas or means of valid cognition or proofs. These are perception, pratyakha, inference, anumana, and verbal testimony or shabda. All the schools also agree that these first 2 pramanas, that is perception and inference, apply only in the field of empirical experience. In the case of transcendental experience, shabda or verbal testimony is the only means and proof of valid knowledge. In Vedanta, the ultimate reality is regarded as Atman Brahman. According to Shankara, knowledge of Brahman is of 2 kinds. Astitva Jnana, or knowledge of the existence of Atman, and Swarupa Jnana, knowledge of the true nature of Brahman. According to Shankar, the first one, existence of Brahman, Atman Brahman, is self-evident, for everyone spontaneously knows that he exists. It doesn't need any other proof. But Swarupa Jnana, the true nature of Brahman, can be known only from Vedantic scriptures. This is also more or less the view held by all the other Vedantic acharyas or teachers. This is where Sri Ramakrishna differs from all the acharyas. Sri Ramakrishna's view is that the scriptures can give only indirect knowledge of the nature of Brahman. Brahman is beyond the ordinary mind and words. In his own simple way, he used to say, Brahma je ki mukhe bola jay na. Sob jinis uchishto hoye geche. Ved, Puran, Tantra, Sardarshan, sob eto hoye geche. Mukhe pada hoyeche, মুখে উচ্চারণ হয়েছে, তাই এটো হয়েছে, কিন্তু একটি বিষয় কেবল উচ্চিষ্ট হয় নয়, যে যে জিনিসটা ব্রহ্ম, ব্রহ্ম যে কি আজ পর্যন্ত কেউ মুখে বলতে পারে নাই। The true nature of Brahman can be only known through direct, transcendent, mystical experience. As our scriptures have several of the earlier speakers refer to the Abhang Manasa Gochara statement in the Upanishads. For the modern man, there is great difficulty in accepting the view of Shankara and other acharyas that the real nature of the ultimate reality or God can be known only from the scriptures. The Hindu scriptures, the Upanishads and the Gita especially, contain different views of the ultimate reality. Which view is correct? These passages have also been interpreted in different ways by different acharyas. Which of their interpretations can be taken to be correct? Moreover, the scriptures of other religions like Buddhist Tripitakas, Bible, Quran, etc. give different views of the ultimate reality. In this conflicting situation, Sri Ramakrishna's view that the ultimate reality can be known only through direct transcendent experience provides the only satisfactory and convincing approach to the ultimate reality for the modern man. The second tenet or principle of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy or message is the integral view of reality. Sri Ramakrishna held that the ultimate reality, although transcendent and the real nature cannot be known, but manifests itself in different ways. Its manifestations are multidimensional, and he accepted all the dimensions. He accepted both the saguna or personal and the nirgun or impersonal aspect of Brahman. In Sagun itself, he accepted the forms of God, that is Sakar, as well as the formless, the Nirakar. In the Sakar itself, there is a problem of the gender, the male and female. He accepted both. Again, he accepted the transcendent as well as the immanent aspects of Brahman, the relative, which he called the Leela, and the absolute, which he called the Nitya. This integral view of reality has undoubtedly important significance in the modern world. This integral view is based on Sri Ramakrishna's view, based on two principles here. One, the Hindu scriptures speak of different levels of consciousness. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, you will find there are 5 levels of consciousness. And Advaita tradition also speaks about different levels. In the Tantras, especially the Shat Chakras, and the different levels of each level of consciousness gives us one particular view of the ultimate reality. Sri Ramakrishna did not merely say that all these views of the ultimate reality are true. He also said that to understand the true nature of the ultimate reality, we have to take into consideration all these views. He did not merely say all these views are correct. To get the total, the holistic, correct understanding of the all the dimensions, we have to of the true nature of reality or Brahman, we have to take into consideration all all these manifestations. Human knowledge has now multiplied so much, and incessant seeking and research are opening up so many avenues of knowledge that the modern man has to live in an extremely complex and boundless world of which he has very little understanding. The integral view of reality developed by Sri Ramakrishna is of much help in orienting oneself to the complexities of life. Some 50 years ago, a book appeared by Joseph Royce, The Encapsulated Man. There it says about the modern man's dilemma. He says a person now has to develop multi-dimensional view of reality. A person who holds on only to one view of reality is encapsulated. To get out of our the capsule, the limitation of our conditioning, of our intellectual conditioning, we have to develop this multi-dimensional view of reality. The third principle in Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy is integral experience. Traditional Vedantic teachers stress the transcendent aspect of ultimate reality. Advaita teachers have spent all their intellectual powers to prove the illusoriness of the world. Such a world view does not appeal to modern youths. India is now poised to becoming an economic power in the world. Thousands of opportunities for creativity, achievement, and fulfillment are now open to our youths. To be told about the illusoriness of the world would be most discouraging and unacceptable to them. Sri Ramakrishna stressed the immanence of the ultimate reality. He combined the path of negation taught by Advaitins and the path of affirmation taught by the dualistic devotional schools. First, by following the negative process of neti neti, not this, one strives to realize the transcendent aspect of ultimate reality known as Brahman. After attaining the highest non-dualistic experience, the illumined soul returns to the ordinary life, and following the affirmative process of iti iti, he realizes the immanence of Brahman in the whole creation. Put in a simpler language, he sees God in all beings. The whole life now appears transfigured, divinized to his illumined vision. He sees the unfolding of divine joy, beauty, and other glories everywhere. Above all, he sees God in all human beings, and this transforms his whole attitude towards humanity. Sri Ramakrishna called this integral experience Vijnana, and the fully illumined soul a Vijnani. Just a little while ago, our Atma Priyanandaji has explained, described this in a much beautiful, better way and more convincing way. This is an idea and ideal which has great significance in modern times. This leads us to the next concept of Sri Ramakrishna's message. Here, one point I would just to mention, yesterday somebody read a paper on Vishishta Advaita. I don't know whether she meant that Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy belonged to the Vishishta Advaita school. It is clearly Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy does not conform to the Vishishta Advaita school. For the simple reason, Ramanuja did not accept the Advaitic view of Shankara. He stopped with Vishishta Advaita. Whereas Sri Ramakrishna's view, Sri Ramakrishna accepted Dvaita, Vishishta Advaita, and also the Advaita. Beyond Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, he went further. And Advaita, he didn't stop with Advaita also. Advaita is like the pinnacle, like a mountain peak, say Mount Everest. If you climb the Mount Everest from the side of the Indian side, you will reach the top of the mountain, Mount Everest. But that is highest peak, I think, on highest point on earth, the Mount Everest. Similarly, Advaita is the highest level of highest pinnacle of experience, spiritual experience a person can have. Beyond that is not possible because the individual merges completely in the infinite. But beyond the Mount Everest, from this, if you climb from this side, the other side, there are more territories, Tibet and so many much long, vaster place beyond that. The same way, Advaita is the highest point, no doubt, but not the last. Beyond that, Sri Ramakrishna went beyond that, and he returned, but returned not by the same route. He went from Advaita, Vishishta Advaita to the Advaita. But when he returned the whole thing describes as a kind of bell-shaped curve. You climb through, you go up by one side of the curve and come down by the other curve. They may look alike, but there is vast difference in their experiential content. Vishishta Advaita is not the same as Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana. Vijnana is a much more advanced and more richer and vaster experience than Vishishta Advaita. It includes Advaita, Vishishta Advaita and Advaita. All the experiences are included in Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana concept. We come to the fourth principle, and that is philosophy of love, human and divine. There are different conceptions of love. Some of the Hindus teachers has taken it as an expression of divine ananda or joy. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism, for instance, love is an expression of the Hladini Shakti of the personal God. Some others have explained it as an expression of knowledge. Ramanuja, for instance, Jnana Visheshya Vacha. According to Swami Vivekananda, love is an expression of unity, oneness of existence. The Upanishads speak of unity at two levels, at the level of prana and at the transcendent level of the Atman. Unity at the level of prana is what appears as love in this world. The love of parents, the love of husband and wife, the love among friends, colleagues, all this is the expression of the sense of unity at the level of prana, identification at the level of prana. However, with notable exceptions, this kind of love is limited, conditional, unstable, impermanent, and causes bondage and very often much suffering. This is known to everyone. But the Upanishads speak of unity at the transcendent level of the Atman. In the famous conversation in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the sage Yajnavalkya tells his wife Maitreyi It's a well-known passage. The husband is loved not for the sake of the husband, but for the sake of the indwelling supreme self. The wife is loved not for the sake of the wife, but for the sake of the supreme self, and so on. This is divine love. This unity at the spiritual level, that is divine love. It is boundless, unconditional, everlasting, and all-satisfying. It liberates men and women from bondage. This noble idea, however, remained in the scriptures, unavailable to common people. It was Sri Ramakrishna who first rediscovered it, applied it in his own life, and taught it to the modern people. In the Indian religious tradition, love for human beings had been regarded as a cause of bondage and an obstacle to love for God. Even Buddha warned against preeti or love and encouraged only maitri, known as Pali Metta, or friendliness. Sri Ramakrishna removed the barrier between love for human beings and love for God. He was one of the greatest lovers of humanity and God the world has seen. That's why Swamiji describes him as Premarpana, one who gave his love to the world. True love finds expression in service, and service involves sacrifice. Here again Sri Ramakrishna removed the barriers between service to man and service to God and combined the two into one path, the path of service to man as God, or to service of God in man, Shivajnani Jivaseva. This idea became the basis of Swami Vivekananda's gospel of social service. This idea is so well known, and it was also discussed several times in the seminar here. We come to the fifth principle of Sri Ramakrishna, a philosophy of harmony. Is the most important and well-known principle of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna is most well known for his message of harmony and of religions. Apart from harmony of religions, Sri Ramakrishna also taught several other types of harmony. First we shall take Sri Ramakrishna's harmony of religions. Sri Ramakrishna's doctrine of harmony of religions is, there are two main principles involved in Sri Ramakrishna's doctrine of harmony. One is three. The Sri Ramakrishna doctrine is based on three principles. The first principle is acceptance. Acceptance of differences. Sri Ramakrishna, he never said all religions are one. Acceptance of the differences is the primary condition for establishing harmony. Had all religions been one, he wouldn't have attempted to practice different religions. So the acceptance of the differences, that's the first thing Sri Ramakrishna did. That is, you are showing respect. By accepting differences, you are showing respect to the different religion. They have an independent existence. This idea itself is, the problem is, the fanatic, for instance, he doesn't accept the right of any other religion to accept except his own. So the first condition for harmony is to accept the right of every religion, to give each religion its own dignity, individual, the right to exist and preach and spread. And the second point is, the second principle of harmony is to see each religion through the eyes of its followers. In modern religious studies, this principle is known as phenomenology. Phenomenology is a school of philosophy developed towards the end of the 19th century by Edmund Husserl. His idea was totally different, to study experience or knowledge per se without any other preconditions. But that principle was applied in religious studies by two Dutch scholars, Christensen and van der Leeuw. They developed the idea that to understand, to study religion, a scientific method is not enough. Because scientific method, if you study religion applying the scientific method, then you can't feel the emotions, the feelings that people feel about God. To experience the not only merely intellectually understanding the doctrines, but to experience the devotion, the other and love, and the other feelings, the loyalty, and these feelings the people, the followers of different religions feel. For that, you have to identify yourself with them. You have to see them through their lives. For that, two principles, this is known as the phenomenological method. It involves two processes. One is what is known as the Ein Fühlen, that is bracketing, that is suspending judgment. You have to, if you go to you can go to a mosque, and but don't try to put your ideas. If a Hindu goes to a mosque, you should forget that he is a Hindu. You should try to experience the joy and the devotion, the devotional fervor that a Muslim feels in the mosque. You have to keep your own feeling, your own ideas in brackets, that is in suspension. So this is one first principle. The second principle is what yesterday Professor Jayan Mohanty said, empathy. I have to identify oneself with the follower of that part, the experiences of that follower of that particular religion. These are the two principles of phenomenology. But the truth is, this Sri Ramakrishna, of course, never knew anything about phenomenology, but he was he authenticated this method. In fact, he is the authentic source of this method. The Vanderleeuw, who wrote the book, Religion in Manifestation, and something I forget. In that book, after discussing all this phenomenological method, everything is a big book. At the end, finally, he says, though what I have written is all true, but my honesty compels me to say that Christianity is the only true religion. So that shows this talk about phenomenology is very just shallow. Nothing, there is not, you can't depend upon that. Whereas in Sri Ramakrishna, seeing the other religions through the eyes of their own followers, that is what he did. When he wanted to practice Islam, he dressed like a Muslim and went to the mosque, or supposed to have gone to the mosque and did namaz and didn't go to the temple for a few days. Similarly, when he practiced Christian religion. So that capacity to identify oneself with the followers of other religions, so that is the important point in Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy of harmony. The third point of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy of harmony is pluralism. Already several people have talked about pluralism. In the modern religious studies, three interreligious attitudes have been recognized: exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. Yesterday, Professor Jayan Mohanty spoke about this, but in a different sense. Three interreligious attitudes are at present recognized in academic circles: exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. To this, Swami Vivekananda added a fourth category known as universalism. Exclusivism holds, my religion alone is true, all other religions are false. Inclusivism says, my religion alone is true, but other religions are not false, inasmuch as they are included in my religion. Pluralism holds that all religions are different pathways to the truth. Sri Ramakrishna is the real source of inspiration for the modern notions of pluralism. A pluralist religious outlook has characterized Indian culture from early Vedic times, but it was vague, general, and never tested or established on a philosophical principle or proved by experientially. The harmony taught by Sri Ramakrishna was not a mere outlook, but was deeply rooted in his life and realizations. He tested and experientially validated its truth. It was generally in the in the morning, Professor forget his name. Jeffrey. Jeffrey Long. Sorry, I've been reading his articles and all that. So sorry to forget his name. He spoke about John Hick. He's one of the main proponents of this pluralism in the West. It is slowly coming up. Pluralism is now mostly it's a movement among the common people, but in the academic and theological circles, it is yet to be accepted. Sri Ramakrishna's doctrine of harmony consists of 5 key ideas. 5 key ideas of Sri Ramakrishna's pluralism. First, the ultimate reality is only one, but it is known by different names in different religions. 2. The ultimate reality is beyond the reach of ordinary mind and words, hence its real nature cannot be expressed in words. 3. The different views on ultimate reality found in different religions are only opinions, math. These opinions are, however, not wrong. They are all true, as they reveal some aspects of the ultimate reality. Fourth point, although the true nature of the ultimate reality cannot be known by the ordinary mind, it is possible to transcend the ordinary mind and directly experience it through a purified higher intuitive faculty. The fifth, this superconscious realization can be attained through different spiritual paths taught in different religions. So that is the main idea. Important point to note is this Turiyanandaji Maharaj has pointed out clearly. Today, this morning, Swami Shanmayanandaji also clearly in his clear presentation pointed out this. The ultimate reality cannot be known. Then what we know as the opinions, they are only jato moth, only moth. That is, they are not contradictory because they reveal some unknown aspect of the ultimate reality. And we have to know the real nature of the ultimate reality, we have to take the sum total of all these views. So these views are complementary and not mutually contradictory, as today, this morning, Professor Anwar Hussain also spoke about that. Sri Ramakrishna spoke about other types of harmony also. Harmony of sex within Hinduism, harmony of spiritual paths, harmony of spiritual life and social life, harmony of ancient and modern traditions. Moral foundation, Sri Ramakrishna stress on the moral foundation to spirituality. Like all other great prophets and world teachers, Sri Ramakrishna gave primary importance to morality in his teachings. He stressed 3 main virtues: Kama, Kanchan, Tyag, evam observance of truth. Although the moral codes of world religions have much in common, there are also several differences among them. These differences in moral codes and conduct are often the cause of conflict among the religions. Sri Ramakrishna went beyond conventional morality and stressed purity, which is the real basis and aim of all moral codes and conduct. The difference between conventional morality and purity is to be noted here. Morality is the basis of religion, whereas purity is the basis of spirituality. Morality is conformity to certain codes of conduct, whereas purity is freedom from desires and instinctual drives. Morality is how we appear to others. Purity is what we really are. Sri Ramakrishna's teaching on the Kamini, Kanchan, Tyag and all yesterday, Professor Shobhit Kohli Sen pointed out this. It is mainly meant for spiritual seekers, not for common people. For ordinary people, he never said people against, was never against marriage, and he never allowed any of his householders to become sannyasi. Even the great Naga Mahashaya repeatedly requested him to give him permission to become to take sannyas, but Sri Ramakrishna did not allow him to do that. So this is a important subject, but since it is a more controversial subject, I skip to the next topic. Philosophy of spiritual fulfillment. Sri Ramakrishna's another great and most important tenet in Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy message. Professor Max Muller has stated that in India, philosophy was pursued not for the sake of knowledge, but for the highest purpose that man strives after in this life. Sri Ramakrishna too, echoing the voices of thousands of saints and sages who lived in India during the 5,000 years of the subcontinent's cultural history, repeatedly stated, Ishwar Labh hai, Manush Jivanir Uddeshya. This was repeated. Several of the speakers here, they also quoted this. God realization is verily the purpose of human life. Here two questions arise. What is meant by God realization, and why should one seek it? In Vedanta, by God is meant the ultimate reality known as Brahman, which is inseparable from man's true self or Atman. As such, is an essential, the individual aspect, individual self or the Atman is an essential aspect or part of Brahman. But owing to ajnana or ignorance, he is not aware of this fact. As a result, he lives in a state of alienation from the ultimate reality. All the problems and sufferings of human life are traced to this spiritual alienation. When through appropriate means, known collectively as yoga, the existential ignorance is removed, man realizes his true nature as Atman Brahman. This is what is known as God realization. Thus, yoga or God realization is a process of de-alienation. The Jivatma is separated from the Paramatma owing to ignorance. Removal of the ignorance, and so the God realization does not really mean the union of the Jivatma with Paramatma. It is only the de-alienation. It has been separated. That separation has been removed. I will pass on to because for want of time, I will pass on to the next topic, that is how these basic principles of Sri Ramakrishna's message, what is their relevance in the modern time, because the seminar is about Sri Ramakrishna, the ideas and in modern times, what is their importance, relevance, especially their application in dealing with the problems and issues in modern times. For that, first of all, we have to understand what the modern times means. So, what are when we talk about modern times, what exactly do we mean by that? If you look at the present day world, what first attracts our attention is the enormous increase in crime, violence, terrorism, immorality, drug abuse, breakdown of family life, corruption in high places, market meltdown, political turmoils, religious conflicts, and other dark sides of modern society. But if you look beyond these dark forces, we can see several mega trends animating the collective mind and world thought in almost all parts of the free world. Some of these mega trends are briefly discussed. I would like to discuss some of the main trends in world thought. The first mega trend is the naturalization of technology in everyday life. This is a consequence of the ongoing electronic revolution. Electronic gadgets like the transistor, the cell phone, television, digital camera, etc. have now become an essential part of the daily life of the common people. As Professor Jayanta Sarkar said, somewhere in Delhi school, class 3, boy will not be admitted unless he brings the iPod with him. See, now it has become even the poorest man, you can see rickshaw pullers everywhere, they talk over the cell phone. Communication, correspondence, keeping records, different modes of travel, medical diagnosis, scientific research, business transactions, entertainment, space travel, even modern warfare. Every field of human life and activity is now dominated by technology. Communication, however, does not mean only sending or receiving information through mechanical gadgets. Real communication is sharing our inner feelings, love and cooperation through people, among people. Unless there is also corresponding growth in human understanding, wisdom and commitment to values, mere advancement in technology does not ensure improvement of human relationships or social behavior. A man may talk for 2 hours over the cell phone to somebody on the other part of the globe, but he may not be on speaking terms with his own wife or colleagues or neighbors. Some years ago, there appeared a book, A Nation of Strangers, in which the author Vance Packard showed that the wide use of media has led to increasing conformity but not created greater sense of community. The communication, modern communication, is creating conformity but not sense of community or mutual love. Without a sense of community, people seem to live in their own isolated worlds, experiencing loneliness and meaninglessness. Sri Ramakrishna's message deals mainly with the transcendental spiritual realms. It does not in any way clash with the modern man's involvement in science and technology. On the other hand, it helps him to adapt himself to science and technology without himself becoming a machine. The second mega trend in modern times is the human potential movement. During the last 50 years, in the East as well as in the West, man's self-image has been undergoing a radical transformation. The earlier image of man as a cog in a wheel of karma or as a victim of the machinations of the devil or predestination is giving way to the recognition that everyone is responsible for his own moral life, his own health, well-being and happiness. There is also a growing awareness that everyone is endowed with many capacities, talents and powers in a potential form, and the main purpose of education and training is to develop these inherent potentialities. The human potential trend is now seen in several fields. It began with the discovery made after the Second World War that success of a company depends more on the human capital, that is, on the resourcefulness of its executives, than on financial capital or labor. Since then, personality development and human resource development have assumed much importance, especially in the business world. In the field of education, much emphasis is now laid on innovation and creativity. Owing to the direct or indirect influence of Swami Vivekananda, there is now also a growing awareness that everyone has within him or her a center of divine power, knowledge and joy, and spiritual life is the development of this inner spiritual potential. Swamiji got this idea of potential divinity of the soul from his own master. The third mega trend is neo-humanism. Till recently, the main thrust of humanism was concern for the poor, the sick and the underprivileged, shown out of compassion or a sense of duty. Such an attitude is now considered to be demeaning to the dignity of human individual. Neo-humanism holds that it is the right of the underprivileged people, especially even the tribals, to claim equal share of the bounties of life and equal treatment in social matters. Handicapped people are now regarded not as disabled people but as differently enabled people. Sri Ramakrishna's message of love and service, seeing God in all people, has much relevance in rendering service, help and to disabled and neglected people. We come to the fourth global trend, moral relativism. With the erosion of faith in traditional religions, the days of absolute standards of morality fixed by religions are gone. In most of the democratic countries, the social life of the people is now governed by secular laws of the state. The present trend is to separate personal moral conduct from the purview of religious codes and to treat it as a person's individual's private affair. All over the world, drastic changes have been taking place in moral standards and in social behavior of the people. Some ways of life and modes of conduct which were once regarded as immoral are now treated as normal and moral. The present day social upsurge in Islamic countries, of which Talibanism is an extreme form, is a collective reaction to the decline in morality owing to the influence of the permissive Western culture. In India, the ongoing agitation against corruption is also a collective reaction of the people against the sharp decline in moral integrity in the lives of those who are in power. In this context, Sri Ramakrishna's teachings and morality, which Swami Vivekananda developed into a moral philosophy, has much relevance. We have several revolutions: electronics revolution, spiritual revolution, education revolution, and so on. What we now need most is a moral revolution. Though it may appear to be an exaggeration, my own personal view is that Sri Ramakrishna has sown the seeds of such a moral revolution. Someday or other, this moral revolution, I hope, will take over in our country. Two other mega trends, globalization of economy and ecological awareness, I skip because they are so well known. We've gone to the next mega trend, that is knowledge revolution. There have been three major revolutions or paradigm shifts in the history of mankind. Civilization began with the agricultural revolution, which brought into existence the agricultural society. In the 18th century came the industrial revolution, which created the industrial society in several parts of the world. From the last decade of the 20th century began the knowledge revolution, which is now bringing into existence the knowledge society. The term knowledge revolution implies four streams of transformation of human consciousness. In the first place, it means the enormous multiplication and diversification of knowledge, what is known as knowledge explosion. Secondly, it means that knowledge is the main force driving economic growth and social changes. Thirdly, with the knowledge revolution, not only scientific knowledge, but every kind of knowledge gains significance and utility. This has opened up innumerable opportunities for human development. The last and most important point is, knowledge revolution means not only increase in different types of knowledge, but a radical change in the understanding of the very nature of knowledge, the process of knowing itself. This is an important point, though there is not much time. I will just want to say something about this point. That is, now the present, the so-called knowledge revolution has not only increased the knowledge, the understanding of knowledge, what is knowledge, and the process of knowing, that itself has been thoroughly, completely revolutionized. Several developments in understanding the nature of human knowledge have taken place during the last 100 years. Knowledge was formerly thought to be something explicitly or consciously acquired by logical thinking through formal education, but structuralist discourses supported by phenomenological, psychoanalytical, cognitive studies have shown the truth to be different. These investigations have shown that formal, explicit, propositional knowledge arises from a vast sea of informal, unconscious, embodied experience. Personal knowledge and collective knowledge are mostly non-conscious. Explicit knowledge constitutes only the surface waves of the mental lake of deeper currents of experience and interpretation in everyone's mind. The importance of this understanding is that it strengthens the validity of faith, prayer, meditation, and other means of acquiring religious knowledge. It also shows the validity of Sri Ramakrishna's use of parables and stories in his teachings. The second development in the understanding of nature of human knowledge originated in linguistics. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Swiss thinker Saussure showed that words refer not to external objects but to mental concepts. Words are meaningful not because they correspond to external objects, but because they arouse in the mind the concepts which correspond to the external objects. Every person is imprisoned in his own mental world of concepts and ideas. Learning is a process of modifying the knowledge which we already have. When you see, suppose I see a cow, the outer or the external object cow, that is known as the referent, that produces a concept in my mind about the cow, and that immediately it is symbolized into the word cow. So, for in our knowledge of any object, there are three ingredients. One is the external object, second the concept within me, and the third one is the word symbol, cow. So once when that is how we learn. But the remaining, the reverse process, when we utter the word cow, what comes to the mind is not the external cow, but the concept of the cow. The cow is not necessary at all. Human beings, that is the power of language. We have developed language to such an extent we can remain independent of the external world. All the mathematical calculations, everything is done without referring to any external object. We live in our own internal world. We are imprisoned in our own concept. When I say Ram, with the word Ram, if I tell you Ram Chatterjee, each one of you who know him, who knows him, each one of you will have his own image of him in his mind. The real Ram Chatterjee nobody knows. So each one of us has created our own world, and we live in this world. This leads to the third. This view that all knowledge is conditioned by mental structures is known as structuralism. In the field of education, it is known as constructivism. Those who study education, they know this. Constructivism is now becoming an important field of investigation. This leads to the third development understanding of the nature of knowledge. This view, which originated with the 19th century German thinker Wilhelm Dilthey, holds that all human knowledge is a result of interpretation. Every human sees the world through his own conceptual framework. When a person hears or reads something, he immediately interprets it according to the knowledge that he already has. Understanding is a continuous process of interpretation. Hermeneutics, the science of interpretation, is thus a basic discipline in education. This is an important development in modern thought. That is, all knowledge is a result of interpretation. We have built up our own mental framework of concepts. So when a new knowledge comes, and when now I am talking to you, each one of you is interpreting my thought in your own way. You can understand my ideas only in relation to what you already know, what you already have in your mind. So this view is known as structuralism or constructivism. This understanding has created a revolution in education. Formerly it was believed that a student's mind was a tabula rasa, a clean slate, and the teacher thrusts knowledge into his mind. But now the idea is, this Swamiji long ago pointed out, everyone learns himself. The teacher only, just like a plant grows by itself. You can add some manure, loosen the soil, but the tree plant grows by itself. The same way, every child learns by itself. The teacher does not thrust knowledge into the child's mind. The teacher only enables. That's why now it is not the enabling education. The teacher only enables the child to learn by itself, self-teaching. Everyone teaches by himself or herself. Dilthey's ideas were developed further by Wittgenstein, Paul Ricoeur, Heidegger, Gadamer and other modern thinkers. According to these thinkers, the main function of language is to enable us to interpret our experiences and not to describe the world. The next step was taken by the post-structuralists. They showed that the constant self-interpretation of knowledge a person does is not free or objective, but is conditioned by the historical, social and cultural circumstances in which he has grown up. The views of every author, in fact all concepts and principles, including scientific theories, are to be understood in the light of their socio-cultural and historical background. There is no such thing as true objectivity. The so-called objectivity of scientific method is a kind of intersubjectivity. Scientific theories describe not the nature of the world, but our understanding of the nature of the world. The extreme form of post-structuralism, known as postmodernism, also holds that to understand the true import of a literary text, it is necessary to reinterpret it in the light of hidden ideas or other hints contained in the text which the author himself did not consciously intend. This kind of reinterpretation is known as deconstruction, popularized by Jacques Derrida. Deconstruction is also often loosely used against all reductionist conclusions, including those of science. Before conclude, I will, because my time is up, but there is an important point about this the structuralism and deconstruction. I would like to say point out its importance in the Vedantic tradition, especially Advaita Vedanta. The reason why we have taken this discussion on recent intellectual thought currents is that if you omit some of the extreme and illogical views of postmodernists, we can see that some of the aspects of structuralist and post-structuralist discourses help us in understanding Advaita Vedanta better, and also in presenting the message of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda in the modern idiom to modern people. Moreover, the philosophical concepts developed by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda have for too long been treated in a rather superficial way and presented in a popular form for common people, especially for the devotees. Most of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna are generally present only for the devotees. In view of the important role knowledge plays in modern society, the time has come for the philosophical concepts of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda to be brought into the stream of modern world thought so that their inherent power can be utilized in the ongoing transformation of human consciousness. But for this, they have to be first brought under the scrutiny of modern academic study and research, and their truth claim and validity to be tested and substantiated within the modern framework of thought. The message of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda should be presented in a form which is acceptable in the academic world. Let us take the structuralist proposition that what is generally taken as reality is a function of the linguistic structures superimposed upon experiences. Let us also consider the views of Wittgenstein, Heidegger, Gadamer and others that all human experience is basically interpretative. This view comes close to the Advaitic theory of Adhyaropa or Adhyasa. Adhyaropa is usually translated as superimposition. This may give the impression that this world is something thrust upon Brahman. It is actually not, nothing is thrust upon Brahman. It is actually a matter of interpretation. We interpret the reality as we experience it according to our pre-existing concepts and thus create our own world. The Panchadashi speaks of two kinds of creation. One is Ishvara Srishti, or God's creation, which is the world as it really is. The other is Jiva Srishti, which is the individual world created by each person, interpreting his own experiences in accordance with his mental conditioning caused by ajnana or ignorance. Following the same line of thought, we may take the Advaitic concept of apavada or superimposition as deconstruction in a broad sense of the term. So that is mainly I wanted to point out that the adhyaropa and adhyasa, the adhyaropa, the idea superimposition, something we have to take it as our own interpretation, the way we interpret the world, that is adhyaropa, and what you call the apavada, which comes very much near to the modern idea of deconstruction. So some of the other mega trends, 3 or 4 more left, that I have no time to deal. One is the quest for meaning. One for the quest for meaning. That is another important trend, because what are known as existential problems like loneliness, boredom, meaninglessness, anxiety. These are some of the existential problems. The most important of that is the search for meaning. The hippie movement in the 1960s and 70s that had its origin in this quest for meaning. It's even now the quest for meaning is going on. The meaning of life can be understood only through spiritual life, and this quest for meaning and the enormous increase in the stress and strain in modern ways of life has made people understand the importance of spiritual life. So that is the next last trend, modern trend now, and that is spiritual interest in spiritual life. And this spirituality has now become an important subject even in academic circles. And this kind of spirituality differs from earlier idea of spirituality. This is the present tendency is to separate spirituality from religion. Religion and normally spirituality had been associated with religion. The present tendency is to separate spirituality from religion. This is nowadays known as secular spirituality. Morning Professor Long, Jeffrey Long told about this in the morning today. The spirituality, the America, the recent poll conducted, about 36% of the people said they are not religious, but they are spiritual. So the spiritual movement is coming up everywhere, even in India also. And then this is in the West, this kind of separation is known as spiritual revolution. So a spiritual revolution is going on. In India, because of the Indian, or especially the Vedantic idea, Hindu, the outlook, the philosophy of religion is so vast and broad. It can accommodate all the science, technology, everything. So there is no need to separate spirituality from religion. So this kind of revolution is not happening in India, but it is the West. It is going on, and already several books have appeared on the subject of spiritual revolution. I will now conclude. The relevance of Sri Ramakrishna's message. We have discussed the above mega trends of modern times for 2 reasons. In the first place, if you want to understand the universal significance of Sri Ramakrishna's message for all humanity and not merely for a group of his devotees, we have to take into consideration these mega trends. We have to understand what role Sri Ramakrishna's message can play in these mega trends. Secondly, these mega trends show that in spite of all the differences that human beings show, they have many things in common, and humanity is moving towards a common goal, which is spiritual in nature. The present global spiritual movement is not a passing fad. It seems to mark the beginning of a collective awakening of the spiritual consciousness of humanity. Darwin's theory of evolution applies only to animals and plants. According to eminent biologists like Julian Huxley, at the human level, evolution becomes predominantly psychosocial. In the view of spiritual leaders like Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and Thayar Chardin and others, the next stage in evolution is spiritual. Swamiji has explained yoga as revolution. Evolution is a slow process, whereas yoga is revolution. What it takes nature to unfold in thousands of years, yoga accomplishes in one single life. Humanity is now poised to take an evolutionary leap in consciousness. Swami Vivekananda stated that Sri Ramakrishna's birth marks the dawn of a golden age of spirituality. What does this golden age or Satya Yuga mean? It means that humanity is now preparing or on the threshold of a new leap in consciousness. There are indications to believe that in future spirituality is going to play a dominant role, transforming human consciousness into divine consciousness. The relevance of Sri Ramakrishna's message to modern times should be judged not merely by its effects on the social and cultural and spiritual life of the people in the present day world, but also by the immense possibilities that it holds for the all-round well-being and spiritual elevation of humanity in the future. The theme of this seminar is Ideas of Sri Ramakrishna and Modern Times. Let this seminar be only the beginning and not an end. I hope the Vidya Mandira or the Vivekananda University or even the Calcutta University would conduct more seminars of this kind on the theme, the message of the relevance and message of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda for the future of humanity. This seminar is meant for the modern times, but the significance of Sri Ramakrishna, message of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda is not confined only to the present times. In fact, their full significance will take decades and maybe centuries to unfold. Swamiji has said that Sri Ramakrishna we have given enough for hymns that the present movement will last for 1,500 years. It takes a long time. We are now at the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century and just at the beginning of the third millennium. Enormous possibilities are before us. The significance of Sri Ramakrishna, the message of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda will be understood, it will unfold itself in due course. And let us all contribute our own little might to the to bringing into fruition this new the bright future for humanity. Thank you all.